either going to be in a crate or not. It depends on their size. But the most important thing back here is the controls for the plane.
Yeah.
Right here. And so I'll take the stick out. This stick just unscrews here and the top comes out. You still have the stub.
Yeah.
I take the stub out and I take this whole torque tube which runs up to the front stick. So the only controls back here is just this tube and it just rotates.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard to
safe.
interfere with that. I do worry about some of the wiring though, so I cover that up. I haven't had a dog wanting to chew on anything, even they could chew on the seatbelt too, which would be bad, but so far the dogs I've flown have just, you know, they settle down, and one of them will sit their head on the, right here, you know, looking over the front.
So what's the story with the dogs? Where do they come from and what's the...
So Pilots N Paws is a website where you can sign up to fly dogs, and they're all supposed to be related to animal rescue organizations. So you could be flying them from one rescue to another. You could be flying them from a rescue to their final destination. Or you could be flying them from somebody who owns the dog currently but can no longer have it, and they're now entering the foster system. And that was my last flight. My last flight was a small dog, a Yorkie, so I just had her in one of these carriers over here. If they're small enough to fit in the carrier, I use the carrier. I can fit that blue and gray one barely down in here. It just barely fits. And I've even had the other one on top of it. So I had 3 puppies once. I had 2 in the blue and gray one, then the other carrier over to the right on top of that. And then that kind of filled up in here into the bubble. So I put a blanket over it so it wouldn't scrape against the plexiglass. So the last one I flew was from Mount Airy, Maryland. 95-year-old owner that had a Yorkie, and he could no longer take care of it, you know. And they didn't have a place for it to go here, so Save a Yorkie Rescue was the ones that were coordinating foster. The foster was in Canandaigua, New York, near Rochester.
Yeah.
So I flew up there with the dog. That was in July, mid-July, and dropped off the dog. And came.
So what's the longest flight you've taken for the dogs?
Well, the furthest one I did was actually done in 2 parts. So there were these Great Pyrenees puppies, 2 of them. They were each 35 pounds, and I put both of them back here. So I usually figure like 80 pounds is around my limit for the back. I fly my dog flies with me a lot. He's 83 pounds. So I figured I could take 2 35-pound puppies if I could take 180. Which is how many pounds of dogs? Amazingly, like, I put them back in here and they snuggle down in and you don't even see them, you know, they just, because you can't do that with 2 dogs.
Forward, which is good too.
Yeah, right. And you can't do that with 2 dogs that don't know each other, but they're from the same litter, and they'll just curl up and lay on top of each other, and there's not going to be a dog fight back here or anything. So I picked them up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the plan was to fly them to Pennsylvania. And then another pilot was going to fly them to Lebanon, New Hampshire, because they were going to a rescue in Vermont. That's right on the New Hampshire-Vermont border. But they had bad weather up north of here. So it was a Sunday. I picked up these 2 dogs and I flew them here, and then I took them home and I fostered them until the weather got good. So I kept them until Thursday, where it was a severe clear day, and I flew them the rest of the way to Vermont. So that was like, it was 2 flights, but I took these dogs all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina to Vermont. But yeah, usually I'm going down to, you know, Southern Virginia, Northern North Carolina, and then flying north up to, you know, I've gone to Cape May before to do a transfer there. I think I did 2 transfers in Cape May, if I recall. So that's a pretty good place to go down to North Carolina and fly to Cape May, and then get up to New England or New York City.
So how often do you fly the dogs?
So let's see. My first flight was like April of 2021. I flew a hound from Florence, South Carolina to here. That dog was just going to Sykesville or somewhere around here. In that case, instead of trying to get the owner to time and meet me here and get in the gate, I said I'll just drive to wherever the dog needs to go. So I just took the dog to their house on my way back to Rockville. That was my first one in like April, and then like 2 weeks later I flew another one. I went down to the Tidewater area of Virginia and brought another dog here, and that dog was going to right over here by Fort Meade, just right off of BW Parkway. So I just drove him over there to the apartment. Then I didn't do any flights for the summer, and then I did this one, the 2 dogs that went from North Carolina to Vermont. And then later they had 3 Great Pyrenees puppies that needed to do the same trip from Raleigh, North Carolina to Vermont. But this time I got a second pilot, and we had weather that cooperated except for down by Raleigh, North Carolina. So I was flying down to pick up these dogs, and and she was like desperate to get them out of there because she has her own dogs, and it was just, she wanted them out of there sooner. But I told her the weather's bad in Raleigh, but the weather is good right up to the North Carolina, Virginia state line. I have no idea if I saw him on Facebook or just read about him in a magazine or what, but yeah, yeah, who knows? I don't know. Maybe another pilot friend of mine did a flight or something. Like I said, it's a little tricky. So if I'm putting it, the way I start my plane too, there's no electric starter. So usually what I do is I want, when it's a person that's a passenger, I get the engine running, then they climb in. So I've had both. Even flying my own dogs, the first dog I owned, he would shake and tremble a little bit when he got in and we were getting ready to head out. And when I did a fuel stop and it was time to put him back in the plane, he would like run away from me. And then my current dog now, when I fly with him, the very first flight, he was like totally comfortable with the plane. And when I do a fuel stop, he comes over and he puts his paw up here, like he's trying to get in himself. And with the rescue dogs, so far I've been lucky that there hasn't been any dog that seemed nervous really. And they just kind of sit there. It gets kind of loud, Usually what I'll do is I want to put the dog in first before I hand prop. Because when if the engine's already running, it's gonna be harder to put him in and stuff. So I put him in first. Normally I'm picking him up from somebody, so I have that person stay here with the dog, keep a hand on him and stuff. And then once I get the engine running, I come up, I lower the nose gear, and I hop in, and then we put down the canopy. Now that can get pretty hot. If the first flight I did was in Florence, I had to taxi a long way to the runway, and it was like 95 degrees. Oh. And with the canopy down, it's like an oven in here. Then the next time I did the same kind of thing, but this time I just kept the leash on them, and I just kind of hold their leash right there and taxi out with the canopy open, but I have them secured so they can't jump out of the plane. And then once we got out to the end of the runway and we're ready to take off, I put down the canopy and we take off. But so far I've really, about half of the dogs I've flown without a crate, and then half of the dogs I've flown with the crate back here. So then that complication goes away when they're in the crate. You don't have to worry about them jumping out or anything. But every dog's been well behaved. I haven't had any messes in the back. I might have smelled some funny smells, but never saw any
No
any evidence. Yeah. So.